Good evening. If you're joining us, we have started the conversations on the road to COP27, which will be held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt in November. My name is denied.According, and we've been having these discussions from 5:30 p.m. live at the Aga Khan University and also live on NTV Kenya.co.ke, as well as all of our social media platforms. Now, the first bit of the conversation, we talked about clean cooking and forest cover and what that means for the country as we prepare for COP27. Now, this next round of conversations, we now get to the bones of COP27, why it really matters for Kenya, for Africa, for East Africa, for the IGAD region, and how you, as a citizen of Kenya, as a resident of the IGAD region of Africa, how you can be involved in these conversations. I think my microphone just went off. Apologies. I think my microphone just went off. Great, thank you. So I was always saying, we begin this conversation on the road to COP27, the meat of the conversation, the road to COP27, what it really means for the continent of Africa, for Kenya, for IGAD, for East Africa, and how you, as a citizen of the region, can be involved in this conversation, how you can get your voice heard as we go to COP27. Now, to have this conversation, I'm joined by an able panel here, and right next to me is ABEBE Tadege from the IGAD Climate Prediction Center. He's a climate change expert at IGAD, and he'll be telling us about what the situation is across the IGAD region, especially now with the region suffering one of the worst droughts in 40 years, and what that means for the region and the food security situation of the region. And next to him, we have PAVIN NGALA, who's the regional director of Oxfam, and then we have Charles MWANGI, the acting executive director of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, and he'll be telling us about what the African civil society groups have to say about COP27 and if we have any lessons to learn from COP26 in Glasgow last year. And then finally, but last but not least, we have John Kioli, who is the chairman of the Kenya Climate Change Working Group, and he'll also be bringing his expertise about the climate situation in Kenya and what that means for the country as we go to COP27. Remember, you can join this conversation on NTV Kenya.co.ke live there. You can also catch it on YouTube, you can catch it on Facebook, or live on your TV. And you can also join on Twitter, hashtag Climate Action, hashtag NMG Leadership Forum, and also tweet me at Zain Wandati, ZEYN Wandati, or at NTV Kenya. And we'll be able to sample some of your thoughts or your questions as we get to this discussion. Now, let's get right into it. Let's start with the regional perspective at ABEBE. What is the situation in the region? We've seen Kenya right now, at least 4.1 million people suffering serious impacts of the drought and being seriously food insecure, one of the worst droughts in 40 years. From where you sit as the Climate Prediction Center, what is the situation in the region right now?
Thank you, Zainab, for that question. Let me first thank Nation Media for organizing this panel and also for inviting IGAD to be part of the discussion. We need to start first with the science. What is the science saying? I'm sure some of you have heard about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the most authoritative scientific body on climate change, which advises governments. They released their report last, I think was it in 2021 and in 2022. And according to that report, climate change cannot be denied now. It is there. It's 100% there, and it's caused by humans. It's the human interference which is causing the warming and the climate change. So now what is needed is action to address the issues of climate change. When it comes to the region, we document the evidence of climate change in terms of warming, in terms of impact, and also when it comes to climate change, we also need not only what has been observed so far, we need also to see the future in 50 years, in 100 years. So we present all those information as a regional center in IGAD. And I have some slides which can be projected.
Yes.
What has been observed in the last 40, 50 years in the region. Is this possible?
Yes, yes. Jackie, we have, if my director can project those slides, you had some graphics to share with us on what the trends of temperature has been in the region over the last couple of years. Those should be coming up on your screen right now. Yes, there we go.
So you can see that the region has been warming significantly. And that needs to be ascribed or attributed to human-induced climate change, or especially the greenhouse gas emission problem. The next slide, if it's possible to see, it shows the trend in terms of food security over time. How many people has been food insecure, especially because of the drought that's happening in the region over the last 4 seasons. You can, yes, this is not the one, the previous one.
No, there was a, Jackie, there was another previous one before this. This is the last thing you'll talk about, the trends in conflict. There was another one on food security, I remember you also shared with us. Yes, it should be coming up right away.
Yeah, so exactly, this is a trend in terms of the food insecure population over time.
Yes.
And at the moment, because of the 4 consecutive drought years, the number has reached 40 million in the region. This is a huge number. So we are ascribing or we are attributing this sharp rise with climate change, with the warming. And the other evidence which we can see is in terms of conflict. Can we have the third one?
The impact
also?
of climate change on conflict.
Yes.
Yes. We can have that up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
there
it's coming.
It's coming right up. Yes, that is.
You can see, this is the trend in terms of conflict. Conflict over pasture, conflict over water, and other natural resources. As they become scarce and scarce, conflict also is rising.
So you have documented evidence on the
yes,
impact
we have documented that with data and analysis and evidence.
Okay, great. So we'll be talking a little bit more on that as we go in. And I know IGAD has done some work to try to alleviate the impact of climate change on food security in the region, PAVIN. Maybe you could tell us a little bit, where are the challenges you're seeing? What's causing this? Why are we unable to feed ourselves so long despite our best efforts?
Thank you so much, Zainab. And indeed, it is unfortunate when you think about it in terms of the challenges that the African continent is facing when you talk about climate change. Before I get to your question, one of the things I just want to reference, as my colleague from IGAD has shared in terms of the impact, is for Oxfam. Oxfam focuses a lot on tackling inequality. And we look at what are the drivers of inequality across the globe. And on the African continent, one of the things that we have found that is significant is how climate change is driving inequality. An inequality part of it that is interesting, for example, is that in terms of carbon emissions, Africa as a whole contributes less than 4% of the carbon emissions.
Yes.
And when you compare with countries such as the US, China combined, being 45% in terms of carbon emissions. So we see a lot of things that are manifested in terms of the inequality on the continent, you know. And as you talk about food security, arable land, one of the things we saw, for instance, is in terms of arable land, Africa provides over 20%, has over 20% of arable land that can be used, you know, for growing food on the across the world. But unfortunately, we are the hungriest, you know. And my colleague has mentioned the fact that at the moment, over 40 million, it's actually what we know for the region is 44 million people are facing extreme hunger levels because of insecurity driven by climate change. We saw, unfortunately, right now we have droughts in Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia. We have floods in South Sudan, and other factors. For instance, 2 years ago we were talking about locust that sort of totally annihilated, food that had been planted. So there are various issues that are driving the inequality on the continent. And one of the things that Oxfam does around this is, as part of it, documenting what are we seeing in terms of impact, but also working with communities in looking at what are the options, what are some of the things we should be doing different, because we really can't be a continent that should be producing, but are faced with that level of extreme hunger.
And we have very high food import bills.
Yes.
Great. So I'd like to bring in Charles here. Charles, you do a lot of work in the region. You, as a civil society group, you have documented the impact of climate change across the continent. A cyclone Idai down south in Southern Africa, the impact of that. What does this tell you when it comes to conversations with African governments? What kind of conversations are you having with them?
Thank you so much, Zainabu. And I must congratulate Nation TV for coming up with this beautiful idea, because this conversation must continue. We must sustain this conversation. And we believe that the media has a role to play in making sure that we shape the African narratives. Because for a long time, we have allowed other people to tell the African story.
Yes.
They have misrepresented us in most of the cases. And I want to say that's why we have the ASA Awards, the Africa Climate Change and Reporting Awards in PACJA, where Zainabu Adati is actually one of the winners last year in 2021. And this conversation must actually continue. But I want to say, actually following from what my sister has just mentioned, climate change is actually a matter of life and death. It's no longer an environmental issue. And the faster we accepted that reality, the better for us. Climate change is a food security issue. We already heard from IGAD, the realities that for sure we don't have food. I tell you what, I was having a conversation in the morning with my mother, checking to see whether there's some maize that I can roast, back home. I was told there's nothing, zero harvest. I come from Murang'a, which is a high potential region, and I cannot imagine what is happening in northern Kenya. So it's actually a life-threatening issue, and we must actually come up with modalities of actually solving that. But we must also understand that climate change is also a global issue. And we are a climate justice organization because, like my sister mentioned, Africa is on the receiving end. We are one of the regions that is actually experiencing adverse impact of climate change, even though we are contributing only 4%. I know Isa Karo, of course, mentioned that we have to do something, of course, internally. We can't just sit pretty. But we must also push those people through their trajectory that they took for them to develop, contributed to their missions. Yes. And that is the position that we undertake, and we must continue supporting our government, Africa Group of Negotiators, in terms of advocating for the African position when it comes to the COP negotiations. Okay,
we'll talk a little bit more a bit later on what exactly the African Group of Negotiators, who they are and what exactly it is they do. But I'd like to bring you in here, Kioli, from the perspective of the Kenya Climate Change Working Group. You were in Glasgow yourself. What did have you been able to track the things we committed to and where our level of implementation has reached so far?
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the Nation Media Group. In fact, what you're doing is what government should be doing, because under Climate Change Act of 2016, sub-article 21 and 23 is public participation and advocacy, which you're doing it very well. So thank you very much for doing this to our country. I want to mention that globally, this is a big issue. 3 days ago, President Joe Biden mentioned that climate change is an emergency. It is a threat. 100 million people are going to be affected in America only. In the UK, temperatures are almost 40 degrees centigrade. They've never had that. Yes. I spoke to a friend there, and she told me her children are sleeping in the basement because it's very hot and they don't know how to deal with it. In France, 24,000 people have been affected by wildfires. More than 34,000 hectares have been depleted. These are forests which were sustaining them. What we are saying coming down to Kenya is that when you drive from MWANGI, Garissa, Bura, Hola, you find animals just around which are dead. This is real. The government is spending a lot of money in mitigating these issues. we did not have milk for the last almost 6 months. So what we are saying, the conversation is, let's see how, as a country, start looking at the policies we have and now meet disaster risk reduction and climate change and realize that the drivers are the same.
Great. So we are going to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll re-examine the slides that IGAD has presented and look at especially the trends in temperature and what that means for the country going forward. Right now, Nairobi being in some extremely low temperatures. And then we'll examine that a little bit and how we can survive the changing climate. Do not go away. We'll be right back after this break.
How do you keep your toilets clean?
I use normal detergent and bleach for washing.
The detergent and bleach cleanless can leave behind yellowness, rust, and germs. Harpic's 10 times better cleaning compared to regular detergents and bleach, and kills 99.9% illness-causing germs in your toilet, including the COVID-19 virus.
What makes Domestos toilet cleaner unstoppable? Domestos does thousands of tests to make sure its thick bleach formula kills all known germs dead, keeping your home clean and safe from germs. Unstoppable Domestos kills all known germs dead.
You do your best out there. Let us do our best in here with the disinfecting power of Jake. Because Jake cleans and kills 99.9% of illness-causing germs and COVID-19 in your home. Jake, your family's guardian against germs and COVID-19.
Running a business online or on social media? Haya basi, mteja wako amekupigia na anataka bidhaa kutoka duka yako ya social media. Tayari mmekubaliana price ya bidhaa. Step ya pili ni kumtumia pay link ya ChapaPay kulipia. Sasa mteja wako akireceive link ya kulipia ataweka details zake alafu alipe. Hiyo payment itaingia direct kwa bank account yako with 100% security. All you have to do now is to deliver the items to your customer and the deal is done. Running a business online or on social media? Receive more customers by accepting online card payments. Call 0703 027 000 or visit the nearest branch through site.
When cooling down is easy, this easy. Nice. You even took it with a smile.
What about yours?
But I know that meat looks tender, but maybe not so much when your chest is burning. Remember what happened the last time? Hey, dude, you don't listen, man. Are you testing yourself? I tried looking out for you, bro. Hey, you see now? How's the heartburn? Look now, it's burning.
Do not hold back in any situation. Eno gets to work on the 6 symptoms of heartburn fast.
You do know you said all of that out loud, right?
If symptoms persist, seek medical advice.
At the first sign of pain, you need a solution that you can trust. Try Panadol Advance. With Panadol's Optizode formula, the tablet absorbs quickly and starts providing fast and effective pain relief you can trust. Try Panadol Advance.
Life is for the living, and making sure that those who we love will be well taken care of.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, we're having the conversations, the road to COP27, talking about how the impact of climate change, not just in Kenya, but on the African continent, and what that means for the continent going into COP27. And before we went on break, IGAD had made some presentation about the temperature, the trend in temperature. I'd like to bring that graphic up again, Jack, if you can hear me. You can, yes, the graphic should already be on air. And if you look at that graphic on the temperature trend, it shows that in the IGAD region, the graphic goes from 1910. It's a temperature review of temperature between the years 1910 and 2020, and it shows the highest temperature rise in the IGAD region was in 2010, when the temperatures rose a little over 1 degree Celsius. And 2020, it came down slightly, but it's still above, it's almost 0.5 degree rise there. ABEBE, that graphic, the temperature, there's a lot of red on that graphic and very little blue. Blue is the low temperatures. What does it tell you for the region? You know, the Kenya Met recently released a state of climate report that shows in areas that are currently growing tea, such as Kericho, Limuru, and now experiencing temperatures that are high, such that in the next 5 or so years, tea production in those areas will no longer be possible. What does this graphic tell you?
Yeah, thank you for that question again. These graphics tell us the anomaly in temperature compared to the baseline climate. Mm-hmm. The baseline climate here is 1961 to 1990. Mm. So when we always talk about climate change, we have to think of change relative to what? Mm. You have to have a baseline. You have to have a reference. Mm. So these graphics, which was computed from the East Anglia climate data set, which they have global average. This is the average for the whole region, not for a single station, not for Kenya, or for the overall average for the region. So we compute the anomaly compared to the 1991 to 1990 baseline climate. So the fluctuations, the ups and downs shows you the variability year by year. But when it comes to climate change, we look at the trend, the overall trend from the start to the recent. So in this case, we can say that the region has experienced about 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade warming over those periods.
Over that period under review?
Yes. So this implies that if you take temperature for Nairobi, for Nairobi, you may not have as long as that one. You may have a record of 60 years at Dagoretti, Kenya Met Service.
Yes.
So if you take and analyze the trend, it will show you somehow similar warming. But still, the variability from year to year will be there.
So the region is above the global threshold of 1.5?
Exactly. It is already above that one. So when the IPCC talks that the warming has happened at the moment, it's 1.2 degrees centigrade warming, that's for the globe. But if you come to a specific location, a specific region, it differs actually. Yes.
That's quite disturbing to hear. And there was actually a report that was recently done by the Kenya Markets Trust that shows there are parts of Kenya that are already living above 1.5 degree Celsius heat temperature rise, including Narok, parts of Turkana, Bomet, recording such high temperatures. Now, PAVIN, having listened to that the region is already living above 1.5 degrees temperature rise, can we survive?
Can we survive indeed? It's interesting for me when you talk about this because of the fact that one of the things I've always appreciated, and especially when you talk about some of the areas where we see these extreme temperature rises, arid and semi-arid areas, is what we have typically seen as the resilience of those communities there, in terms of the types of livelihoods, in terms of some of the measures they take as coping mechanisms. Now, unfortunately, what we are seeing is that there's an increased frequency of the disasters related to this. So for example, over the last decade, 2011, we had a major drought in the region. And at that time, what we saw was unfortunately over 250,000 people dying because of famine
In the whole region?
In the region, in the Horn of Africa, just based on what my colleague is sharing in terms of Horn of Africa. And then in 2017, we also had another major drought. And at that time, we were lucky because something that has become increasingly important is how we use early warning systems, how we use the information that we're gathering with, for instance, our colleagues from IGAD in terms of rainfall patterns, you know, and implications in terms of water access and food security. So 2017, we were able to avert a major disaster in terms of people dying. But we're in 2022. We're talking about another disaster in terms of over 44 million people affected.
Yes.
And then, you know, and what we're seeing is an increasing frequency of these things. So as we talk about the temperature rises and the ability of people to cope, it's actually not possible unless we're doing something about it, unless we're investing in looking at alternatives in terms of agriculture investment, unless we're looking at mechanisms to support some of these communities, especially those living in arid and semi-arid areas, through some of the social protection systems that should be in place, because our communities, despite their resilience, are really not able to cope unless we're intentional about some of the policies and mechanisms in place.
Charles, you've seen that, slide on the temperature rises in the region, and that the region is already living above the 1.5 degree threshold. The Paris Agreement, the COP in Paris, sought to limit global temperature rises to a maximum of 1.5 degrees, or if it goes too far, 2 degrees Celsius. But IGAD region is already living above that. Parts of Kenya are already living above that. You, as a civil society groups, you've been known to be raising your voice about this climate change matter and trying to seek change. Have you seen change that can actually bring these temperatures down?
Thank you. Thank you, Zainabu.
Oh, your mic?
My mic is not working. Thank you. Thank you so much, Zainabu. You know, the data that was just presented by IGAD really compares very well with the data that has been released by IPCC. And especially, you know, the sixth, you know, assessment report. And you see, the argument has been that Africa is actually already hitting beyond the 1.5 threshold. And this is a good indication within the IGAD region. And based on this, the African group of negotiators, rather the African governments, have been pushing for consideration of Africa as a region with special needs and circumstances, you know, as a matter of principle. But interesting enough, whenever you go for these negotiations, and especially referring to COP25 in Madrid, we realize that parties, especially from the north, were so much against this particular position.
And even
but what is even
yes. President Kenyatta raised concern about that at COP26 last
Exactly.
year.
But what is even more disheartening is the fact that, especially what we saw at COP25 in Madrid, one group that is called, you know, the least developed countries, out of which majority are actually from Africa, were opposing that position. And I want to argue that Africa must refuse to be fragmented, because our adversaries benefit by fragmenting us. So that we are told you are least developed countries on one end, others are not. But the reality of the matter is, Africa continue to suffer. If you look at the agenda on loss and damage, because that is a very, very big agenda this year, last year it was, for sure we are seeing a lot of back and forth in the discussions about financing loss and damage. And our partners from the north, who have contributed greatly to the emissions, are refusing a position that you lead to establishment of a funding mechanism for loss and damage. But losses are already being experienced, you know, from the data being presented. You saw what happened in Mozambique and Malawi. For heaven's sake, we must start putting human face in these negotiations. We were in Malawi in April, Zainabu would remember. And we decided we are going to do a different conference. We do want to bring, you know, the technocrats and that high level, you know, kind of, you know, panelist. We brought women from Malawi, from Mozambique. And one woman, I think Nota, she's called Nota, you know, from Malawi, actually broke down at the podium, narrating how she lost her livelihood, children, family members, and so on and so forth. Until we put, you know, this human face in these negotiations. We'll continue arguing about brackets. We'll continue arguing about one clause or the other clause. But the reality of the matter is, until we put money where we're supposed to put it, to the rest of humanity, we're wasting our time. And no matter what we see in these conversations, especially the first few days, the leader summit, just before COP, right, last year, you know, in Glasgow, there were about 120 presidents and prime ministers attending, And they give beautiful statements. But when it comes to the actual negotiations, when the technocrats get into those particular rooms, we hear something very, very, very different. I think we must continue pushing, for one Africa, we must continue pushing, for consideration of Africa as a region, and especially in these circumstances, as we progress to COP27.
There was also a lady from Kenya who attended the same meeting in Malawi that you mentioned, who was from Baringo County.
Exactly.
And she talked about how the rising lakes in Baringo County affected her as a person, her family, her community, and what they lost as a result of the rising lakes. But on a national scale, the government says the country lost at least 17 billion shillings as a result of the rising lakes, the schools that were submerged, the roads that were destroyed, the people who are left homeless. And I'd like to bring you in here, Mr. Kioli. Looking at the basis where we've already established the basis from where we are starting this conversation, the rising temperatures in the region, the number of people who are food insecure, and what happens at these COPs. How can we make ourselves heard as a continent?
Thank you very much, Zainab. I think this COP has three main things. One is the issue of loss and damage. There are things that happened we cannot reverse. If we go by the polluter pays principle, which is in Paris Agreement.
Could I just interrupt you for a moment there? Both of you and Charles have both talked about loss and damage. Both of you have talked about loss and damage, but neither of you has defined what it is. So maybe you could define what you mean by loss,
yes,
what you mean by damage.
A very easy explanation. Since the agrarian revolution, when Europe started doing things that are polluting and things that affected us, there are things that happened. Our lakes are drying, our rivers are drying. These are things that happened before. And nobody's talking about that. We are now talking about what they will do in the future. So what happened in the past needs to be addressed in terms of compensation. There is no security, there is no insurance we can run for, because they seem not to be keen on compensation. It's actually an issue of compensation of the developing countries that should be done. And this is encapsulated in the Paris Agreement, that in, I think, Article 4.2, it talks about financial help to the developing countries. So can we revert back and say we demand what is for us? Number two, there is the issue of finance. There is no technology we'll get in cooking stoves without finance, without technology. And this must be linked together. Finance needs to come together with technology. Number three, there is the baby that was born in Glasgow called Global Action on Adaptation, which is embedded in three things. We want to add our people resilience on adaptation, because what we need now is adaptation. Forget about mitigation, forget about emissions and everything. We want food on the table today.
And by adaptation, you mean
Yes.
how we can survive the rising temperatures?
We do not need vaccines now in terms of climate change. We need medicine now, okay? Because mitigation is like vaccine. But now what we need now is actually food on the table.
How
Number
to cure
two,
the problem.
Yes, number two, we need to increase our adaptive capacity. How can we manage, okay? And then increase our resilience. Because those three things are the ones which we are struggling with now. We need more money to manage these atrocities as a country.
That point of money, we'll get back to it later, because there seems to not, there's no consensus on exactly how much money is needed in order to give Africa this adaptive capacity. But I'd like to bring you in here, ABEBE, this adaptive capacity from where you sit as a region. Are there things that communities are doing around the region that are giving them resilience against the climate change that the rest of the region can learn from?
Yeah, I think let me first come on loss and damage. The loss and damage is the compensation required beyond adaptation. Like my colleagues mentioned, there will be permanent damage because of climate change. So we need compensation. When we say compensation, it's not begging. Those who polluted, those who caused the problem has to pay us. It's not begging money. They will be required by legal means to pay that compensation for the damage and loss. Maybe on my comment on the issue of forgetting mitigation, I think we are saying that if it's more warming, it will be more damage, more losses. So we should not ignore mitigation as well. It should also be there. In fact, we have to push those who are polluting, those who are emitting a lot of greenhouse gas to reduce their emission. We have to pressure on that, but at the same time, because we are contributing to the problem, for example, we mentioned about Kenyan targets in their NDC, 32%.
Yes.
Reduction. That's already a commitment by Kenya.
But we need $63 billion for 15 years.
You have to ask for it.
Yes.
So, but we need to be, because not only at the national, even at the individual level, we are contributing to the climate change problem. So we should see climate change as a development issue. We should see that climate change is an issue of clean technology, sustainable technology, and sustainable development. So we have to push both for mitigation as well
adaptation.
as adaptation. So when it comes to your question on adaptive capacity is very broad. We have to develop economically. We have to have technical capacity. We have to have
the technologies,
the technology and everything. So those aspects, that's what we need to push also. Yeah.
Great. PAVIN, over the last couple of years, Kenya has been doing a lot in the agriculture space, pushing for a climate-smart agriculture policy and even implementing a couple of projects on agriculture, on climate-smart agriculture. And even some of the money we've gotten from the Green Climate Fund has gone into funding the agriculture space. Yet we are still here in the worst drought in 40 years, 4.1 million Kenyans still hungry. Why isn't it making a difference yet?
Yeah, I think it connects to something we said earlier, the fact that unfortunately with the climate change trajectory, it's on a path that we are not turning back on, you know. So in terms of impact, it will continue increasing. And so in a sense, there are various things we have to be looking at. On one hand is the investment. And one of the things I just want to flag, especially because we are all agreeing on this, the fact that when we talk about climate finance, we're not asking for charity. It's actually about justice. You know, the fact that the African continent, countries such as Kenya, are facing harsh impacts of climate change, we are saying we do need those resources, and those commitments made in Paris need to be delivered on, and that is something we have not seen. You know, our governments, and especially just coming off the back of COVID, you know, invested quite a lot, you know, in looking at how the recovery for communities. But unfortunately, on the African continent, when you look at it in terms of where is our tax revenue going, you know, most of it is going towards debt repayment. So when we look at the type of resources, if you're talking about 63 million, a lot more is needed for the communities, you know, because we will continue to face increasing impact, and also in terms of geographic scope, that will continue to increase. So I think the bit is actually about the fact that a lot more is needed in terms of investment and support, both on the part of finance, but also as we talk about technology, what does that mean and how can we bring it in and simplify it, especially in the different spaces for the communities that we work with.
There was actually a report that UNEP presented in Glasgow last year that sought to disagree with the $100 billion funding that was set in the Paris Agreement to help communities in vulnerable countries to adapt to climate change or mitigate the impacts of climate change. And the UNEP report said actually countries need more than 10 times that amount of money to be able to survive the impacts of climate change. Yet the goal for the Paris Agreement itself has not been achieved. And we are saying we need way more than $100 billion. So Charles, how can we ensure that we actually get this money to enable us survive the changing climate?
Thank you so much, Zainabu. Of course, the money answers it all. And I want to go back to the question of adaptation and mitigation. In Africa, what we need most is adaptation. Because we have no choice, we have to adapt. The impacts are here already, we have to adapt. Mitigation only presents an opportunity for us to take a different development trajectory, low carbon, development trajectory. But if you look at the climate finance infrastructure, the global climate finance infrastructure, 25% goes to adaptation, 75% goes to mitigation.
Yes.
Why is 75% going to mitigation? Because mitigation is about sale of technologies. Where are the technologies coming from? Of course, not from Africa. And that is why we have been pushing for what we call, global goal for adaptation. And
Could you maybe, Charles, tell us what are the examples of adaptation, what are examples of mitigation, so that Kenyans can properly understand?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Adaptation simply means, cushioning our people against the effects of climate change that they're already experiencing. Provision of, water, for example, talk about, building of dams, talk about, giving communities, seeds that are fast growing, for example, and so on and so forth. Looking at the health sector, all those kind of things that are going to cushion us against the impacts that we're already experiencing. Mitigation, on the other hand, means removal of greenhouse gases from atmosphere or reduction of those emissions. You reduce, burning of fossil fuels, you reduce the issue of probably using coal, and so on and so forth. So that is the difference. But I also want to say that we have several funding infrastructure globally, one of them being GCF, the other one being Adaptation Fund. I know there was a brother here who mentioned about, some money that is available that people are unable to access. Now, globally, the situation is the same. But why is it so? It's because the measures that are put for you to be able to access, the procedures, the protocols, is out of this world. So the communities, in Barigo, the communities in Turkana cannot be able to access, those resources. They ask for what they call bankable proposals. For heaven's sake, what we need is resources and to simplify mechanisms. But the other catch is, a lot of resources being released through GCF. It's also coming in form of loans. For heaven's sake, we are doing business with the poor. And that is the same problem we have with the proposal on loss and damage. Because they are proposing that probably we need to go the insurance way. Now, I call this, burning my house, and then you sell a fire extinguisher for me, to me, for me to put on the fire.
I'd like you to hold that thought on insurance. We'll discuss it a little bit later. John, why is finance such an emotive issue? Because in every single COP, this matter of money comes up, yet every single COP ends without a concrete solution on where the money will come from or how this money will be delivered to the people that need it the most. Why is it such an emotive issue?
Because it is packaged in a complicated manner. We started in Kyoto Protocol from 1992. We came up with CDM. CDM was like a mechanism whereby we allow you to plant trees in Kenya, but we continue polluting in China, in America. So why I'm very reserved on mitigation as opposed to adaptation is because we continue harnessing your emissions and you continue polluting, you continue industrialization. Climate change is an economic thing, let's face it. We are vulnerable because we don't have money. These temperatures which have gone low, people have died, Zainab, because they can't afford blanket, they can't afford ajiko, they can't afford medication. This doesn't happen in Europe unless it's a wildfire. These people have money. They can buy a fan, they can buy, everything around them. So going back to money, I think we need to raise our ambition. All these mechanisms that are coming, apply to GCF today. It will take you 3 years. 3 years.
To acquire the money.
And you have to be, like what my friend here said, bankable project. So they easily put money in geothermal because it's easy. They can value that. But my grandmother there needs a solar lantern worth 1,000 Kenya shillings. She cannot get it because GCF, big organization, think that is not bankable. They cannot quantify it.
Would it be easier then if the government applied for that money and then Kenyans got the money from the government?
There you come. And that's why we are very sorry that the Climate Change Act 2016 failed in some of the components. Succeeded in the Directorate, it failed in the Climate Change Council, it failed also in the Climate Change Fund, which is Article 25, where it has been established that in the 2016, there's a basket for money that needs to be established to cushion Kenyans, to cushion civil society, to cushion private sector, researchers, universities, counties, government, to get in money from there. That basket is not active. That would have saved millions of Kenyans to cushion on issues of climate change.
So just to go back on the GSF bit, you said it takes 3 years.
On average, ask those who have
3 years.
applied. Yeah, and it has to be a big organization, because you'll spend like 20 million, 30 million, just application, my friend. So if you are struggling NGOs, you can't. Your application will not even go the second level. You'll be told if you don't get this kind of money, don't even go and partner with other organizations.
So when you say bankable project, what is an example of a bankable project?
Geothermal. Geothermal is bankable because that is government to government. They'll put money there, they can follow it, but they don't want to struggle to take a solar lantern to my grandmother, whereby they need a lot of, of small things to make it bankable. They don't want to go that direction. And that's why mitigation is very easy. Plant 1,000 acres, will give you trees. We'll give you money for trees. But we don't want to go the other direction of building boreholes, drilling boreholes. You don't want to give me money to survive. You don't want to, So I don't know how to call it, because animals are dying. I told you in Garissa, in Hola, Bura. Nobody will come and give you help even to buy, grass for those animals, because that is not bankable. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. You cannot touch it. They don't want that. Yeah.
ABEBE, is planting trees enough? There's been some conversation going on around the world that planting trees is no longer enough to reverse the impacts of global warming. Does the same apply for the IGAD region? Is planting trees no longer enough for us?
Well, planting trees is very important. It has many benefits. It's good for the climate because it absorbs greenhouse gases. Like the previous panelists were talking about agroforestry, where you get fruits as well to make you food secure. So it has a win-win situation. But it's not only, for example, if we take Kenya, how many foreign currency does Kenya pay to import fossil fuel to drive your cars? Billions, isn't it? Billions of dollars, hard currency. But if we bring or adopt the electricity vehicles, if we are able to manufacture electric vehicles here in Kenya, is this not something which is good for the country in terms of saving hard currency, in terms of reducing greenhouse gases?
Yes, and that is food for thought that we are going to think over as we go into this next break. And then when we come back, we'll talk about some of the solutions that are being floated to reverse the impacts of global warming. Do not go away. We'll be right back after this break.
The Communications Authority of Kenya, CA, regulates the broadcasting industry, promoting development of local content and ensuring responsible use of broadcasting platforms for national good. The Communications Authority of Kenya, opening your world.
Hii hapa super jiko, jiko la kisasa, inapika kwa haraka, inaweka joto jingi kwa muda mrefu, na inatumia kuni au makaa kidogo.
Nakumbuka mwaka uliopita nilipokutembelea. Hapa jikoni ilikuwa ni moshi tu.
Hela nilizotumia kutibu macho na mafua, natumia siku hizi kwa mambo mengine. Na save kuni, na save makaa, na save afya, na save pesa, na save mazingira kwa kutumia kuni kidogo au makaa.
Jumbe huu umeletwa kwenu na Wizara ya Kawi kwa ushirikiano na GIZ na washirika wenza.
Downy perfume is an all-day fragrance for my clothes. Other women touch up often, but Downy perfume stays on my clothes longer than expensive perfume. So I can stay fresh for all the moments that matter. Try it for 20 shillings.
How was your day? Busy? Okay, if it really has to know, let's start with hot, nasty, fast, furious. Ooh, that's gotta hurt. But it's all cool. When cooling down is easy, this easy. Nice. You even took it with a smile.
What about yours?
Good morning, Janet.
Wow! A morning person. And you are?
I'm Casey. Now help you with anything to do with your KCB bank account. Pay bills, transfers, statements.
You're hired.
I'm your internet banking security ninja. And with the app for your mobile phone, we can hit the road together. Need a ride?
Let's go.
Alrighty. With you anywhere, anytime.
Register at your nearest branch for KCB Internet Banking today.
At the first sign of pain, you need a solution that you can trust. Try Panadol Advance. With Panadol's Optizode formula, the tablet absorbs quickly and starts providing fast and effective pain relief you can trust. Try Panadol Advance.
Red Bull gives you wings.
Stubborn dark marks? Stop. Discover the power of vitamin C with the new Garnier Even and Matte Booster Serum, a highly concentrated serum that deeply penetrates, clinically proven to reduce dark marks by 43%. Get even glowing skin from day 6. New Garnier Even and Matte Vitamin C Booster Serum by Garnier. Naturally.
Sakaja ni jina lako halisi.
Nafikiri mlialika Sakaja. Jina lako ni Zubeida.
Now well on this one I will stand with Zubeida mazi. Ini Nairobi unaweza fikiri unajua mtu kumbe umjui. I think Zubeida aliuliza swali ya mtaani. Buda ni wewe. Ni kama kupatana na pastor wenu kwa club. Ama uingie heaven ukutane na Huda.
To summarize what you have said, debt is here to stay. So in short, debt is oxygen.
Not really oxygen. Money is next to oxygen.
Can you live without debt?
Yes,
totally debt-free.
Yes, you can.
Here at the Great Oasis Gardens in Nanyuki by Optiven, located along the Nanyuki-Rumuruti Road and only 11 minutes from the Cedar Mall and right opposite Mount Kenya Wildlife Estate. Call us on 0790 300 300.
We asked Kenyan women to tell us what they look for in a lotion.
Warembo, ni nini muhimu kwenu mnaponunua body lotion?
Smoothness, scent, glow.
Leo tunaweka kwenye jaribio body lotion ya bei ghali na ya bei nafuu.
Ungenunua gani?
Hii inai-transform dry skin kuwa deeply nourished na kui-smoothen. Na fragrance nayo, wacha tu. Why pay more? Nunua nice and lovely body lotion. Ni bora zaidi kwa bei nafuu.
It's just nicer and lovelier. Chagua Kenya's #1 body lotion.
Stubborn dark marks? Stop. Discover the power of vitamin C with the new Garnier Even and Matte Booster Serum, a highly concentrated serum that deeply penetrates, clinically proven to reduce dark marks by 43%. Get even glowing skin from day 6. New Garnier Even and Matte Vitamin C Booster Serum by Garnier. Naturally.
Huh? Well, nature is full of wonders. Red Bull gives you wings.
How do you keep your toilets clean?
I use normal detergent and bleach for washing.
The detergent and bleach cleanless can leave behind yellowness, rust, and germs. Harpic's 10 times better cleaning compared to regular detergents and bleach, and kills 99.9% illness-causing germs in your toilet, including the COVID-19 virus.
This is NTV.
Tonight, a standoff is in the offing over the use of Mnyao Stadium as both Kenya Kwanza and Azimio claim use of the facility for their final rallies slated for August 6th. Also tonight,
The Deputy President and our candidate is attending the debate.
Deputy President William Ruto now confirms participation in the presidential debate as moderators of the final showdown are unveiled. Plus,
Mi nashukuru vile hiyo unga iliteremshwa chini.
By the way, familia leo itakaa imekaa chonjo.
joy as Kenyans throng retail shops to buy the 100 shilling per packet maize meal, even as retailers stare at losses amounting to 175 million shillings, occasioned by stocks they had paid for in advance. And we delve into the Deputy President debate's scorecard on front and center.
We asked Kenyan women to tell us what they look for in a lotion.
Warembo, ni nini muhimu kwenu mnaponunua body lotions?
Smoothness, scent, glow.
Leo tunaweka kwenye jaribio body lotion ya bei ghali na ya bei nafuu.
Ungenunua gani?
Ina transform dry skin kuwa deeply nourished na smoothen. Na fragrance nayo. Wacha tu. Why pay more? Nunua nice and lovely body lotion. Ni bora zaidi kwa bei nafuu.
It's just nicer and lovelier. Chagua Kenya's #1 body lotion.
Since the pandemic, all mums know to be cautious of the many kinds of everyday germs that spread easily. Get peace of mind and protect the ones you love with the power of Dettol bar soap. It cleans and protects from up to 100 illness-causing germs. So no matter what type of mum you are, trust Dettol.
Dettol antibacterial soap 60 grams is now 50 shillings.
Experience Swiss-based education in the heart of Nairobi. With practical hands-on skills, we prepare you for the dynamic world of culinary arts and patisserie or international hospitality management. Travel the world and gain global work experience through our international placement network as you shape your career as the next global future leader in hospitality. Welcome to the Boma International Hospitality College. Application now open for September 2022.
Stubborn dark marks? Stop. Discover the power of vitamin C with the new Garnier Even and Matte Booster Serum, a highly concentrated serum that deeply penetrates, clinically proven to reduce dark marks by 43%. Get even glowing skin from day 6. New Garnier Even and Matte Vitamin C Booster Serum by Garnier. Naturally.
Life is for the living. Make sure you live it well. Life is for the living and making sure that those who we love will be well taken care of.
Welcome back. We're having these conversations on the road to COP27, the first of many to come in the journey to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, talking about what Kenya wants out of COP27, what Africa wants out of COP27. And before we went on break, we were talking about the emotive issue of climate finance. And I'd like to draw your attention to a report that was published in June of 2022, the state of climate finance in Africa, the climate finance needs of African countries. And the report says that 51 out of 53 African countries that submitted their nationally determined contributions, which are basically the climate action plans of how they intend to survive the changing climate in their various countries. These action plans have provided data on the cost of implementing those plans, and collectively they represent more than 93% of Africa's GDP. And the amount of money that these 51 countries will require between the year 2020 and 2030 is a staggering $2.8 trillion in order to implement their climate action plans. Kenya only wants $63 billion out of this. $2.8 trillion. So where will that money come from? These are part of the conversation that we are having. And there's already some reaction, some feedback on this conversation. And Mwema Wambua on Twitter says that, is the climate action discourse devolved into the counties? Have counties integrated or aligned the climate action targets in their plans, and which are commensurate to their budget priorities? And then there's Anton, goodness, I can't pronounce the second name, but he says the most important story of our time is climate change, and despite the climate chaos raging across the planet and urgent warnings from experts, our dependence on fossil fuels persists. How did we get here? And he's also drawing attention that the BBC is having a similar conversation tonight on the road to COP27. But we've got reaction from the audience. We have a live studio audience at our makeshift studio at the Aga Khan University. There's a lady here who has a comment. Please stand up, say your name and your comment.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Abigail Kima. Mine is more of a reaction and also...
Your microphone. Just continue.
Can you hear me? Okay,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
Something that you can all think about. Charles, you talked about a meeting that you had in Malawi, where you had women coming from Malawi and Mozambique, those that have experienced the impacts of climate change to a great extent. And their presence in that meeting had them share human stories. So how do we, as different stakeholders in this space, come together to amplify more human stories? We've had graphs, we've had conversations about the trends, which seem a bit too complicated for people to relate to. So how do we work together to amplify more human stories as different stakeholders, including the media? What can we do about it so that we put a face to the climate crisis?
Great. Charles, how do we work together?
Thank you so much. That's a very good question. You know, when parties failed to agree on a funding mechanism for loss and damage in Glasgow, something was introduced, and they called it Glasgow Dialogue on Loss and Damage. So when we went to Germany, in June this year, there was that particular dialogue, and you could hear, technocrats, of course, arguing about the experiences on loss and damage and so on and so forth. And I was like, we are wasting our time here. Those are the women that needs to go to COP. I mean, we need to start now bringing this reality, and the media has a role to play in terms of bringing out these particular stories, so that as we talk about putting resources, somebody said we are not begging. We are not begging. We are saying those who are responsible must actually accept to take responsibility. Mind you, 80% of the total greenhouse gases emissions are contributed by only 20 countries in the world. Ironically, the same 20 countries contribute account for 80% of the global, GDP. And therefore, we are saying they have the resources. Those who have caused the problem have the money. They have the resources. They must avail the resources for use by the communities, in terms of solving that. I know we have a problem, within our Paris Agreement, because, of course, Article 8 talks very well about loss and damage. But then there was a decision, which we call CP21, paragraph 51 of that decision, that actually happened in Paris when we were passing the Paris Agreement, that actually says that you cannot hold any country responsible for losses and damage. And that one disables Article 8 of the Paris Agreement, for example. So we must actually also, support our negotiators so that we are sure that our positions, are not watered down, in those clauses, in those articles within the Paris Agreement and other provisions.
Yes. Now, I'd like to bring you in here, PAVIN. She asked a question: how do we work together? And young people and women play a critical role. In fact, some scientists have argued that women and young people suffer the greatest impact, the greatest burden of the changing climate. How do we make room for them at the table?
Thanks a lot for that question. I think it's really important that the voice, the face of the people who are being affected is at the forefront, because sometimes we lose sight of that in all our deliberations and technical terminologies. So one of the things even Oxfam has been doing is supporting in terms of the partners and also communities that we work with, and saying, let them be in this space, let them communicate what the impact is. couple of months ago, I was in Somalia, and, meeting women who have been walking kilometers to look for water, basic things, and then we are saying, instead of me coming to the front in that, when we do the media coverage, why don't we talk to that woman and let them share their story? Another thing, especially as we've been talking about mitigation, that I thought is really important is a conversation that's happening around reducing carbon emissions, but what does that mean for that? I don't know how many of you, in terms of in the villages, actually have gas or electricity. We are saying, let's stop using fossil fuels. My grandmother at home uses wood.
Yeah.
Really,
In fact, most families use
Most
a
families.
combination.
So think about it. What does energy transition, moving away from fossil fuels, really mean for that person we are talking to? And so one of the things we found, in fact, unfortunately, is that what we see as energy transition is very capital intensive. And so the finance part of it also is about looking at the resources that, as we talk about mitigation, also are reflected in what is needed at different levels of community, because then we are speaking to ourselves. We are making calls for agendas which cannot be reflected in the communities where we are. So as we go to that mama in Marsabit, when she's talking about, I'm getting firewood from here, and you're telling me I need to be involved in reducing fossil fuel usage, please, let's look at what are the solutions.
Yes.
And what makes sense in that context.
Yes, so ABEBE, I'd like to refer back to your slide on temperature. And the State of Climate Report by the Kenya Meteorological Department of 2020 showed that the average annual temperature change in Kenya in 2019 was just a little under 1 degree Celsius. Just a little under 1 degree Celsius. But there was enhanced period over that time by around 200%. Increased rainfall by around 200%, which is how we ended up with the rising lakes situation. But Lodwar, Mandera, Lamu, Mombasa were flagged as counties with high temperatures, counties that recorded high temperatures. In fact, Marsabit was recorded as the county that saw the highest temperature increase of 1.5 degrees. This is in 2019, 1.5 degrees Celsius in 2019. So looking at those figures for Kenya and the figures you shared for the IGAD region, what are some of the quick fix solutions that we can implement maybe over the next couple of months or the next year or so as a region to mitigate or to cope with these rising temperatures?
Thank you, Zainab, for that question. A very interesting one. I tried to mention about the issues of climate change, which is a long-term issue. Maybe in terms of time scale, we see at 10 years, 50 years, even 100 years. And we have also the climate variability aspect, the year-to-year fluctuation. So those differences always will be there. Even if when you see the long-term trend is increasing linearly, which is an evidence of climate change, when it comes to a particular year, it could be a cold year or it could be a warm year. That's what the variability comes in. But in terms of those extremes, I think at IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center, we provide early warning information. That means early warning information before every season starts. For example, in Kenya or in parts of the Horn of Africa, we have March, April, May as one key rainy season, main rainy season, in fact, for Kenya. And also we have October, November, December, the other rainy season, which we call it short rainy season. So if you go to Ethiopia, Sudan, and Eritrea, the key season is June, July, August. This time it's raining there. That's their main rainy season.
Yes.
So you see the seasonality. We need to know about the difference in seasonality among the countries. So before every season begins, ICPAC provides forecast, whether March, April, May is going to be dry or floody. And then we provide advisories, what actions needs to be taken, and so that early action is taken to mitigate those impacts. So we need to use early warning information. Even at the national level, the Kenya Met Department also provides those information. So it's good that people know about those forecasts, they prepare themselves, and they take early action based on those advisories.
Thank you. Charles, very quickly, what is our ask at COP27?
We have several asks that we've been actually pushing all through. One, Africa must be considered as a region with special needs and circumstances. Number two, we must have some progress on the global goal for adaptation, because adaptation is a necessity for Africa. In Germany, we didn't see much of progress in that. Number three, we must have a proper funding mechanism for loss and damage. And we're not calling for a facility, because they can give us another facility like GCF, which doesn't help much. We want a proper funding mechanism for loss and damage. Number three, we need to have some agreement, you see, on the new quantified, finance goal. Because we're saying the 100 billion that was promised has not come through, but again, it was a political, figure. So we actually need really to actually, have a new goal, on finance and be focused on that. Number four, we are still calling for enhanced ambition from the partners in the North. She talked about the NDCs, or the National Determined Contributions, and that Africa, we have overcommitted. Although a lot of our NDCs, the implementation is actually conditional, meaning we must get resources. The 60 billion she was talking about here, Kenya only committed to less than 20%. That's what we can afford.
13% actually.
13% actually. Yes. So we are supposed to get the rest of the resources from outside. That is not coming. The tragedy is, Africa, even if we implement our NDCs 100%, we can only reduce global GHG gases emissions by only 4%. 96% is in the North, where we have NDCs that are not ambitious at all. In fact, if you look at all the NDCs globally, they are taking us to 2.7 degree trajectory. Already, at less than 1.5, we're already experiencing all these impacts. So it means that even if we implement them 100%, we still have a problem. So we must call for enhanced ambition from those who are emitting more. Thank you.
Thank you. Kioli, very quickly, how can you ensure that the commitments made at the COPs are actually implemented at the local levels?
Thank you very much. I think as Kenya and other developing countries, we went to a forced marriage. We came up with a baby called Nationally Determined Contribution. We overpromised. My colleague has said it clearly, we can only cater for 13%. Yet, we are supposed to, again, take the promise back and say this is what we've covered. Nationally determined contributions are good because part of it is mitigation that we are going to develop and also gain from that. But because it is encapsulated in our constitution now as a multilateral agreement, we need to raise our ambition. When it comes to counties, counties have gone ahead of the national government. They have now committees. There are champions in counties now who have even ward committees on climate change. The story is percolating
and
to that level.
some counties even have funds
Yes,
for climate
they have
change.
funds, Turkana, Marsabit, Makueni, Kitui, and all these counties have put money. The national government has not. I think this is in 2009, when we were drafting the Climate Change Act of 2016, Kenya, by the time Uhuru Kenyatta, our president, signed that bill in 2016, we were the second country in Africa. And all the countries started duplicating our act. But now, we are back. Because the foundation has been done, we have the directorate, we don't have the walls of the house, which is the Climate Change Fund, which, again, we don't have the roof, which is the Climate Change Council. What I appeal is we have a train which is being seen at a train station, but it has no engine. And every time the president passes there, he sees the train.
So
he thinks it's moving,
will.
but it has no engine. So the bearers of this, the ones who populate the president's diary, please put this Climate Change Council in place.
Yes.
So that can be a gift to Kenyans, that Climate Change Council, because Article 6B says the Climate Change Council shall approve and implement the National Action Plan.
Yes.
G, it will implement the issues of Climate Change Fund.
Yes.
This has not been done.
So you need the political will to be
Yes,
able to implement
absolutely.
the changing climate. Unfortunately, that time is really, really not on our side, and we need to make room for the news of the day. But remember, this conversation does not end here. This is just the first town hall of many as we go into COP27, and you can keep this discussion alive on social media at Zainwandati, at NTV Kenya, #climate action. Let's engage. Let's talk about COP27. What does climate change mean to you? How have you been impacted? What would you like to know about COP27? How can you make your voice heard as we go into COP27? Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for making time for this conversation. We leave it there. My name is Zena Bondati. Have a good night.